Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, why thousands in Spain are protesting the housing crisis.
Another housing crisis for Spain's residents, where prices are soaring and fewer people can get on the property ladder.
Rents are soaring, wages are stagnant, affordable housing is out of reach. But how did it get this bad? And what's next for Spain? I'm Manuel Rapalo, and this is The Take.
My name is Jaime Palomera, and I'm an economic anthropologist. And my main focus in life is to solve the housing question, the housing crisis, and especially the inequality that this housing crisis is generating.
Welcome to The Take. Let's start with these protests taking place in Spain. Tens of thousands of people in different cities. Let's start with what you saw on Saturday. What are people demanding?
People are really, really upset.
They rattled their keys and called for a general strike.
The mounting anger and a lot of dissatisfaction with the current situation.
I came because we tenants need to be listened to. And it is good to fight a little bit against what all landlords in general are doing with the use they are making of their housing.
I'm also a tourist, and I've been traveling around the world. Tourism is indeed good, but it's also good to protect people who live in these places.
So young people and not so young people are really anguished about the fact that it's very difficult to foresee a future where you can have a home and have kids the way your parents and grandparents did. There's a lot of anger at that, and people are just demanding solutions. But also people are organizing. It's really impressive to see the extent to which people that, felt that had an individual problem are getting together and creating these new so-called tenant unions that have been growing very fast in Spain and in other countries.
The turnout that we're seeing at these protests is people from literally all walks of life, right? Young people, old people, what they have in common is that they're struggling to find homes. Can you talk about what that's like for the average person in Spain today? How difficult has it become to find affordable housing?
Yeah, so right now, for anybody that's not a homeowner already, trying to get on the housing ladder, trying to get a home, is like entering a Monopoly game when that game has already started. So it's like you're going to try and, buy a house. But, if you've played the Monopoly game ever before, you'll see that when the game has already started, the other players already own many streets and have built, buildings, houses. So for many people, it's like they're entering that game and it's very hard to buy a house. And what you do is you're just paying rent all the time. And before you know it, you're really impoverished and you're just looking at the other players playing while you're having, a sandwich and just watching Netflix.
I'm just troubled by some of these statistics that I've been learning. One in particular, I'll read it to you. This is recent data in Spain. 85% of people under 30 still live with their parents due to unaffordable housing. The question that I have over this, with so many young people delaying because they don't have a choice, what are the consequences of delaying this independence for so many young people, for a majority of young people in Spain?
There are many. Also, a lot of these people are already working. They have wages. Sometimes they're good wages. And they're seeing that it's really difficult to envisage, building a future for yourself. So it's really hard on you. And also that the problem is also that many of these young adults, what they hear is that they're not doing enough and that they should be more entrepreneurial. Those are the kinds of discourses that we're hearing all over the world.
It sounds familiar, right? That's what young people hear from older people, is just pull yourself up from your bootstraps. You've got a job, you've got a wage. If I could do it, you can do it. But that's not the case, right? Yeah.
The thing that like people should know that in 1997 in Spain, it would take you 3 years and a half of your full salary to pay for a house, for a home. And nowadays in a city like Barcelona, it's like many years of salary. In Mallorca, the islands, it's even more. The first thing that you think is like, what am I doing wrong, right? And you blame yourself. But what these new organizations, these housing movements are doing is to point at the fact that it's a collective problem. Like many people are in the same situation. And also that there are political reasons behind this. And that's key.
I want to ask you about those collectives and the sort of organizational structure of the people that are now, taking to the streets to protest this. But, you're an expert on this topic. You've written about it, but this is also an issue that affects you personally. And I was hoping that you could talk about that aspect of things. Where you're living today, can you talk about how this housing crisis is affecting your neighborhood and your neighbors?
So I'm 42 years old. I live with Nuria, my partner. We have 2 children, 2 beautiful girls. And, we work really hard. And we're not among those that are really having a hard time. But it's really difficult to think of doing what my parents had done already at my age. When my parents were my age, 42, they had already bought their home 12 years ago, and they had already paid for it. They were already homeowners. And me, I've been for more than 17 years now, I've been a tenant years already. So it's really, really hard to think of owning a house. And what's happening around me is that a lot of people are really desperate. Like what's happening now is that, okay, so 2 generations were able to buy their home. But since the great financial crisis of 2008, almost 20 years ago, whether you buy a home or not depends on whether you'll inherit or not, whether your parents will give you money to buy or not. And that's at the root of the crisis, the political crisis that we have now. A lot of young people younger, much younger than me, they're saying in the polls that they don't believe in democracy and they feel that a dictatorship might be more useful. And I think that has to do with the crisis of liberal democracies, because where does that crisis come from? For me, what I think is that when people are working so hard, 14 hours a day, to build a future for themselves and for their children, and they cannot achieve that dream. So the whole idea of the meritocracy, collapses.
And it's hard to blame them. It's hard to blame these folks, right? And this isn't just an economic impact that this is having. This is having this social impact. This is having an impact that overturns people's lives, that overturns families' lives. What are some of the cases that you've seen?
Yeah. Actually, you asked me something that I didn't fully respond to, which is how it's affecting our neighborhoods. But I'm going to respond to that and to what you just asked me. So, for instance, I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who lives in Mallorca, the island of Mallorca in Spain. It's a beautiful island. It's full of tourists. And there are a lot of wealthy people buying a lot of land and housing. So she lives in Mallorca, and she just managed to get a public job as a teacher at a school in Ibiza. So the thing is, she got a job as a teacher in Ibiza, but it's so expensive to live there. She cannot find a room that's less than 1,000, 1,200 euros. And that's a lot. It's like most of her salary. So what she does every day, she takes a plane every day from Mallorca to Ibiza. Then she teaches there. And then at the end of the day, she takes a flight back to Mallorca from Ibiza. And she does this every day in the week. So it's a completely, it looks irrational if you look at it. But that's happening all over the world. So it's really dysfunctional as an economic model.
More with Jaime after the break. So, Jaime, you've actually written a book about this topic. Specifically, it's called El Secuestro de la Vivienda. That translates to the kidnapping of housing, or the sequestration of housing. This is a book that was just released in Spanish. You argue that the housing market is rigged in favor of wealthy investors. It's rigged in favor of landlords. What makes this so, and who benefits the most here?
So economists focus all the time on supply and demand, and they say if you increase the supply, then prices will come down. But they don't look at like the existing housing, the homes that are already built, how they're distributed, who owns them. And the thing is that over the last 20 years, the very wealthy have accumulated a lot of homes. So just to give you a figure here, a fact. So in Spain, since 2008, the rental market has boomed. So there are 1.3 million new homes in the rental market. These are not newly built homes. They already existed before 2008.
This is part of the confusion that I think a lot of people have seeing this from the outside, because there's always the immediate perception is, oh, this is a housing shortage.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's the thing, that like the rental market has boomed. So the reason, like if you focus on the supply, you're missing really what's going on. The reason why there's so many new rental units is because a lot of working families and middle-class families have lost their homes over the last years. After the great financial crisis, after the COVID crisis, there have been so many evictions. So these are people, they used to pay their mortgage, they cannot pay, so they lose their home. Others are just when people get older, in order to get, good care, nursing home, they have to sell their home. So the question is, who's buying all of those homes? So it's basically the wealthy, people who already owned a lot of assets. And what do? Why do they buy so many houses, so many homes? Because they use it to increase their rents. And so there are so many things that you can do with a house that you cannot do with any other product. They can be kept vacant and their price still goes up. They can be used as touristic rentals, like clandestine hotels, or, they can be used as like ordinary rental units. But the reason why wealthy individuals are buying a lot of homes, and not just homes, but also essential resources for life, is because these are by definition non-competitive markets. It's very easy to increase the price of these goods. There's no competition really. It's very hard to create, anything close to the idea of a free market. And this allows them to drive up the price, and, it's a much more profitable investment than many other financial products. And this is happening a lot in our economies, like you're in the US, I'm in Spain, in Europe. In weak economies, those with money, with a lot of money, the easy thing to do is buy homes because it's really profitable.
You said something really interesting right now. We referenced this is something that happens in weak economies. And I don't think that the perception around the world when looking at Spain is that Spain is a weak economy or some sort of struggling nation. I think it's very shocking to people who are seeing these protests and thinking, is the housing crisis really that bad? Can you talk about that? How has Spain's economy changed, and what is that doing to shape the current crisis that we're seeing?
So for instance, right now Spain is growing by 3%, and everybody's like, wow, that's a miracle, because like Europe is kind of generally stagnating. And the reason why this is happening is because the touristic industry is booming, and so there's a lot of job creation, but like with really low salaries. So even though the Spanish government has increased salaries, real salaries are not growing. They're going down because the cost of life is so high, especially, again, houses, which is the main investment that any family will do. So it doesn't matter if the government increases, for instance, in Spain, there's a minimum wage and it's relatively high now. I mean, it's been increased, or it's, close to what other European countries have. But it doesn't matter because as long as the housing price continues to grow by 8% every year, people's real wages are going down.
And that's what leads them to take to the streets. Let's talk about that organizational structure, this sort of collective building that's been going on and building up. You work with the tenants union in Spain. You're actually one of the co-founders of a tenants union in Catalonia. What are you hearing from people? What is the answer to the crisis that people want to see?
One of the demands of the demonstration was that, first of all, like the price of rents should go down by 50%. And you could think, wow, that's a lot. But the thing is that prices have gone up, whereas, wages haven't. So that's the first thing. The other demand is that people who are currently tenants can be safe, like feel that they're not going to be evicted next year. People are saying, okay, I want a rent that's affordable, but like that's not, gonna squeeze, choke us. But also, I want to be sure that, when the agreement comes to an end every year, that I cannot be evicted and my family, all of us have to move, etc. So a lot of people are coming to terms with the idea that they'll never be able to buy a house like their parents. And what they're demanding is that the rules of the rental market are changed.
The Spanish government, the European Union, is obviously paying very close attention because these protests are now tens of thousands of people on the streets. They cannot be ignored. What's been the sort of response from the Spanish government? What's been the response from the European Union? Because from my understanding, the EU now has its first ever housing commissioner. So there are some steps being taken. What do you make of the steps that have been taken, to responses that have been given?
So my experience, I've met many politicians and many people in different governments over the last years. And when I have asked them, so they always say that we're in favor of affordable housing. And when I ask them, okay, but do you think that housing in general should be cheaper, that the price of housing should go down? Generally, there's either silence or, an uncomfortable, laughter. And what I've come to realize over the years is that most politicians in power, they don't want to bring the price of housing down. Why is that? It's mostly because they think that housing is a macroeconomic factor. So if the price of homes go down, then the value of the assets in the hands of banks and big firms also goes down. And this worries them. But the thing is that whenever people are asked, if in Spain, are you in favor of the price of your own asset going down, if that means that it will be more affordable for people to buy a house, 75% of people say yes. Because it's not just a generational problem. Like older people, like my parents, my grandparents, they're all super worried about what's going to happen to their children, grandchildren. They can see that there's a real problem. And I'm saying this because very often people commentators like to talk about, a generational clash, war against different generations. And it's not really the case. They're really, really anguished. There's a general anguish about the current situation. But going back, Spanish government in particular is one of the governments in Europe that's more openly, at least discursively, what they say is that they're openly trying to address the housing crisis with different changes in norms and rules. But it's very limited what they've done. Very, very limited. And unless they start facing that structural changes are needed, we're not, things are going to get worse and worse. there's a point in which people will like say, this is enough. And this is what's happening in Spain right now.
Jaime, Palomera, thank you so much for joining us today on The Take.
It was a real pleasure anytime.
And that's The Take. We're always listening to what you think of the show, so let us know what kind of episodes you'd like to hear more of and what you thought of this one. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. That's where you'll find all of our recent content updated regularly so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. We'll be back tomorrow.